Yay! Hello, beautiful people. I see some people coming in. All right. Hello and welcome. P, Elisheva, Allison, Nina. Hey, Nina. Kenny, you're so supportive. I love you. Um, it's so nice to feel you all here in this space. We're going to give a couple of minutes for other women to join us here today. I hope that you've been having a beautiful Memorial Day so far. Let me know what you did today. I would love to hear what it is that you got to do with your wonderful day. It was so sunny out here. If you're in California, I want to hear what you were up to today. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from. All right. So as we are waiting here for other beautiful women to join us, um, I want to invite you to leave your questions for Wendy in the chat box and let me know what it is. Let me know some questions that you might have that you would like for me to ask at the later portion of my interview here with Wendy. And then also all throughout the conversation, you can just pop down to the ask a question box so that you could, as you feel a question come up, you can put it in the chat box there. Great. So Elisheva says, hiking, feet in the stream. You're in Kotadi. Beautiful. It sounds like it was really warm out where you were. It sounds like the stream was calling you. Let's see here. Nina, you got some sun outside in East Los Angeles. Awesome. I love that. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Out of all the places you could have been, you're here. We're all here together. I'm so grateful. Amanda says, on a sun-filled porch in Berkeley. Beautiful. Is that where you are now, Amanda? All right. So we're going to give it another minute or so. Awesome. Um, and then we can go ahead and start. So hopefully you have a journal nearby, also maybe some water or some tea available for you to just kind of get into this space of receptivity for this conversation. Anything that makes you feel warm and receptive inside. All right. Cool. Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and start. I'm so excited for you to be here with all of us today. It's a beautiful Memorial Day here in California, and like I mentioned, out of all the places that you could have been, you chose to be here, and that says a lot. So thank you for lending your time and your attention here. This is a space where inspired women like you get to tune in with wisdom keepers from around the world that can illuminate the next steps that we could take together, both personally and collectively. And we want you to take the next empowered steps into the world after all of this global reset with more self-trust. So this is the space for you to be able to resource yourself, ask some deep questions, reflect on the topics at hand that we're going to be discussing. And today's topic is going to be wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Wendy May onto the screen now. And then I'll go ahead and do a little bit of an intro for you all. All right, Wendy, let's see here. Beautiful. So I've just invited you, Wendy, onto the screen. Yay! Here
Working.
we are. Yes. Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Oh, it sounds like there's a little bit of feedback.
Hmm.
Can you hear that? Maybe
Yeah.
do you have two screens on, or is it me?
Let me see.
Figure this out together.
Oh, yeah. Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a bit of an intro. So today we have with us Wendy May, the author of Regenerative Purpose and a coach and speaker on the process of soul purpose alignment. Wendy May is a regenerative purpose guide, a conscious business coach, and recovering achievement addict. I love that. I laugh every time I read that. A Harvard alumni with a graduate business degree from UCLA, she started on her own purpose path in 2015 after leaving a 15-year career in a corporate leadership and organizational consulting. Through her writing, speaking, coaching, and retreats, Wendy supports the process of soul purpose alignment so we can recreate a world of work that works for everyone. Thank you so much, Wendy, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. So let's get right into it. So tell us a little bit about your story and what inspired you to be doing the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny to like actually hear you read out my bio. I'm like, really? Is that who I am now? It's kind of funny to like hear all these descriptions of yourself because like I feel like I'm also kind of in a space of nothingness right
Mhm.
now, like just also in between things and questioning my own life and what I'm supposed to be doing next. So
Mhm.
I think that's kind of a common experience at the moment.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my path, I guess, yeah, it's my 5-year anniversary now of having left my corporate job, and it's like it feels like dog years. Like I
Mhm.
was really sort of conventionally successful. Like I went to all these like really like good schools and like got good jobs at good companies and yada yada. Like, did the whole thing like
Mhm.
that you're expected, and then finally got to a point where it was it was so painful for me because it wasn't
Mhm.
really it wasn't my true self and it wasn't really aligned. And
Mhm.
I basically was like on a regular basis going to hide in conference rooms and crying because I was
Right.
just like, this is so off. Like this is just so off. And
Mhm.
I couldn't really put my finger on what was wrong. I just could feel from a very deep place that like it was not aligned. Like where I was
Right.
at that moment wasn't the right place for me to be, but I also had no clue where I was going to go.
Mhm.
Um, so I kind of quit my job in that state of like just I have to leave, but I don't know what I'm going to do next.
Right.
And that was like 5 years ago. And I've done a bunch of random things since then. I was doing independent consulting for a while. I've, run women's retreats. I've done coaching. I've done a bunch of workshops and trainings myself. And now I've written a book. And at the
Mhm.
moment, this is really sort of my main mission is to spread the message that's in this book because I feel like it's something that's really needed for humanity right now. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Nina says, bless that journey and your courage. I love that. I love
Mm.
that. It really is quite the journey that you've been on, and I mean, I got to read your book, and I'll tell everybody here that is just really incredible. It was so poignant and incredibly accurate to what I feel. I feel like there's a collective narrative that's being opened up right now around this question around purpose. So many people find themselves in between places, and when it comes to the topic of purpose, sometimes some of us have shame around not knowing what our purpose is, so to
Yeah.
speak. So, for anyone here who may feel that way, could you describe some common misconceptions that some people may have about what purpose is?
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly what I'm here to call bullshit on, right? So this idea that like somehow we need to find our purpose or figure out what our purpose is, and if we don't, that we're somehow deficient. Like the way that we treat purpose these days, it's almost become like a way of oppressing ourselves by like saying like, oh, I don't know what my purpose is, like, and I should, right? This whole like should
Right.
voice. It's like, okay, we basically just like traded purpose for like another like self-flagellation stick. Instead of like beating ourselves up for not making enough money, now we're beating ourselves up for not having our purpose sorted,
Right.
right? So it's
Mhm.
just like same salad, different dressing is what I always say. So it's like we
Mhm.
need to actually not just shift what we're doing, like that's important, but also we need to shift how we're doing it.
Right.
Um, in a way that's much more connected to nature, our own selves as part of nature, and being able to do it with more ease
Mhm.
and alignment, right? That's not passive. It's not this like kind of like, floppy, like, impotent kind of thing. It's very powerful, but it's this like powerfulness that comes from a sense of relaxation and ease and self-acceptance. And I
Mhm.
think probably some of the I don't know if I would say misconceptions, because I think to me it's about coming into balance, right? Like I think the old way of looking at purpose is and was useful for a lot of reasons, but I think that there's another perspective that needs to also be integrated, right? Like, and
Mhm.
I would say it's a more feminine perspective, right? So
Mhm.
old school purpose, we tend to think of it as like it's fixed, right? We
Right.
have a purpose. We think of it as being kind of a singular focus, right? And we think of it as being very personal, right? The way that we
Mhm.
talk about it, say it's my purpose.
Right.
And I would say that my approach on purpose is that it's not fixed, singular, and personal. It's
Mhm.
actually dynamic, multidimensional, and relational, right?
Mhm.
So it's much more of an aliveness. It's much more of a co-creation and a conversation that is evolving, right? And that like there's part of our brain that doesn't like that, because we'd love to be able to just like pin our purpose down and like print it on a business card and be like, this is my purpose. That's it. It's like satisfying somehow to be able to do that. But like I think the truth of the way that we live and the truth of nature is that it's not quite so clean cut, right? And that it is
Mhm.
always evolving. And I feel like the second that you feel like you know something, including like I think I know my purpose,
Mhm.
there's a part of possibility or potential that gets cut off, right? Like the second that you say that you know something, you've now cut off all the other possibilities, right? And you've
Mhm.
stopped listening. Actually, more importantly, you've stopped listening. Once you're
Mhm.
like, okay, I've got it, I know what my purpose is, and then you're just like on a linear mission to achieve that purpose, like as a
Mhm.
goal,
Mhm.
and making that into like this object, then it's
Right.
you sort of lost the plot in terms of actually being in this co-creative conversation with life.
Right, right. And I love that you said that it's like an object because you talk about that in your book about objectifying it, like treating it as something to achieve and just kind of put on on your to-do list or, on some kind of linear timeline. And I think that translates a lot in the way that we view so many other things in this culture that, is very consumerist and things like this. It places this kind of transposes the same kind of values onto this, right? Say different salad, same dressing, however it
Totally.
was that you said that.
Same
Yeah,
salad, different dressing.
there you go, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. The
and
second that we make it into an object, there's a
Mhm,
power dynamic, right? Because like if
mhm,
purpose is an object and some people have it and other people don't, that creates a hierarchy, right?
mhm.
So like this is the bullshit of like you shouldn't listen to me about what your purpose is, right? Or anyone, really. It's like it's you completely have the power to connect with that yourself, and it's always here. It's not something that you have to like go out and like grab and find and capture and like brand.
Mhm.
um, so it's a disempowering perspective, right? To treat it as an object, right, rather
Right.
than an experience. When we treat it as an object, there's like I talk about this in the book of like this concept of purpose haves and purpose have nots, right? And then it gets commercialized,
Mhm.
and it's kind of a little bit like a bit of a dilemma, right? Because I'm right now thinking about like, well, what is my offering in the world? And I am thinking about like, okay,
Mhm.
do I make a program? Do I make a course?
Mhm.
But then it's like sort of like along the same lines of like then becoming like a commercial thing, right? That you
Mhm.
sell to people, right? But
Right.
I think what I want to try to keep sight of all the time is that ultimately people don't need anything external to find their purpose or to figure out their purpose, that it's ultimately an inner journey, right? And I talk about in the book that there's certain qualities that you can cultivate within yourself to like be able to experience the flow of purpose more freely, but ultimately like you yourself have the keys to all of that, right? Like no coach or, you know, teacher, guru, or whatever's going to be able to give that to you. Like ultimately it's a practice, and also you never arrive, right? You never get there and like, oh, I'm done, right? This whole thing about like always having this feeling of I don't know, so that you can really be alive with what's happening in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. It's really placing the power back into the individual's journey. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot that I'm getting around listening that you're kind of alluding to, listening to what that wants to be for each person. And you know, I know some of the women watching this interview are either self-employed, furloughed, or even laid off at the time being due to the current global circumstances and in such an uncertain time, when so much emphasis could be placed on survival, what's the significance of actualizing and cultivating these practices to connect with our purpose?
Yeah. It's paradoxical almost, but you know, Viktor Frankl wrote about this in Man's Search for Meaning, right? It's the idea that like when your survival is threatened is actually when this feeling of needing to self-actualize, or I would say self-transcend, becomes much more present, right? There's an interesting thing that happens, right, when where survival is threatened, that somehow we have this moment to really question
Right.
why we're here, right? And to like have this moment of alignment, because it's almost this like, it's the idea that like when you touch kind of your own impermanence and your own death looming, that you can feel a sense of aliveness, right? It's paradoxical again. It's like this feeling of like, okay, well, I feel like, yeah, it's an opportunity basically to connect with that feeling of like, I want to really live my life like while I'm here, you know?
Right.
And as far as like the moment that we're in right now, like I'm in it too. Like I just, I was running an online business selling biodegradable glitter for the last 4 years. Just last
Awesome.
week, I ended up closing that business, right? So I find myself also in a moment of having no income, and questioning, like, what am I going to do next? Like, am I going to still carry this book message forward, right? It's not really paying me. Like, is this really my mission in life? Do I need to do something else, right? It's that the intersection of all these things of like, you know, what is supportive to life and what is supportive to me as part of life, and being a participant in that cycle. And really, you know, we talk so much about trust, and
Right.
we need to trust, we need to trust, we need to trust. But, you know, there's a lot in that, right? Because some of it can be kind of bypassing of like physical reality and like financial circumstances and things like that, that it's not just trusting. It's also finding stability in a foundation, right? That in a
Right.
sense, like being able to focus on practices to cultivate qualities, to activate purpose flow is a privilege, right? Having the space to do that is a privilege, right? And not everyone necessarily can focus time and attention there, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I love that you touch on that, and thanks for sharing, vulnerability about where you're at. I mean, we're all really kind of going through some form of uncertainty at this time, so I really appreciate the honesty there. And I love that you're just touching on this aspect of privilege. Um, what how could we bring attention to the intersections of privilege, and how and what these intersections might affect or influence,
yeah,
our connection to purpose.
yeah. This is one of my favorite topics. I mean, there's a whole chapter in the book about privilege and like how privilege impacts purpose. Um, and I would say it's a topic that most people who talk about purpose don't touch on. Um,
Mm.
for me, there's a subtle subconscious orientation that we have towards purpose that is very telling in terms of privilege, right? Basically, it comes down to sort of two baseline beliefs. Like we either have this belief that purpose is only for the privileged,
Right.
or the opposite of that belief would be like, you know, purpose is available for everyone, right? And so depending on which one of those subconscious beliefs you carry, your orientation towards purpose shifts, right? And so again, there's this like separation thing that happens of like, is there only purpose for privileged people, or is purpose available for everyone? And what does that mean for the like landscape of inequality and injustice that we see, where not everybody is able to access or express purpose on the same level, right? And what does that mean for us, more privileged people, right? And I would assume those of us who are here are probably on the spectrum, more privileged rather than less privileged, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that. And P says this, yeah, totally. The systems in place may impact one's ability and resources to fulfill their purpose. Yeah, I feel like we're all in different places, and yet because we are able to be here, it does say something about how much privilege we have. And I know that there is in your book, you talk a little bit about, these different perspectives that one can take with their privilege in regards to purpose. And,
Yeah.
you talk about four perspectives. Like one of them, I remember being like feeling burdened by the privileged, or maybe in denial of the privilege, and then being another perspective would be, burdened by it, or feeling like you have to be a martyr.
Yeah.
Could you expand on this? I feel like this is just a really juicy aspect that I really resonated with in your book.
Yeah. So there's this thing that I think is pretty common called privilege guilt, right? So this idea that like, okay, I'm privileged, and so I feel this like sense of duty, right, to
Mm.
do something good for
Right.
humanity, and that can feel really heavy, right? So
Mm.
one way that the psyche deals with that is if we aren't actually ready to do the hard work that engaging in our purpose requires, we kind of have this denial thing of like, oh, well, not everybody can be worried about purpose, so I'm going to just not worry about it either, right? Like,
Mhm.
even though I recognize that I have privilege, I think that it's not fair in a sense that I
Mhm.
have space to deal with that question. And so you kind of dismiss it as like, oh, privilege is, or purpose is just the thing for like whiny elite people who are like, self,
Mhm.
involved kind of thing, self-indulgent.
Mhm.
And then the other perspective is the burden, or what I call like the savior
Mhm.
perspective of like, okay, I'm really taking this on as my job. And there's something really beautiful about that, like desire to be in service, but then it becomes depleting, right? It's
Mhm.
not really sustainable. So like I talk about the regenerative nature of purpose, and like,
Mhm.
how do we access the natural cycle that we are part of so that it doesn't become depleting? Because again, it's like, in a way, there's a beautiful intention behind wanting to be in service and become sort of the savior, but the savior complex is ultimately toxic because it becomes self-oppressive, right? It's like we're saving everybody else at the expense of ourselves, and then that can't actually continue to feed life. We've actually checked out of the matrix of life because we're not actually caretaking ourselves when we're only caretaking other people from this sense of I'm higher up than you, so therefore it's my
Mhm.
job to take care of you, right?
Mhm.
So those are really ultimately, I think, not what I'm talking about when I
Right.
talk about regenerative
Mhm.
purpose. And I would
Right.
say where the privilege thing comes in for me is that purpose isn't about the form, right? This is part of the distortion, right? There's actually 5 different reframes that I talk about in the book, a couple that I mentioned already, like that it's not personal, it's relational.
Mhm.
Another one of the dimensions of reframe that's important to me is that it's not about the form, it's about
Right.
the experience. So when people say things like, different levels of privilege limit our ability to express our purpose. Yes, and only if you have a particular image of what purpose looks like in mind,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
if you decouple purpose from the form, actually everyone can express purpose, but someone's purpose might be to be a good role model as a single father to their
Right.
daughters that they're raising, and like that's their purpose, right?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to like start a nonprofit and like feed 1 million hungry children in
Right.
Africa, right? Like that's a whole different expression of purpose.
Mhm.
And I would say that there is a privilege, there's a privilege spectrum, right?
Mhm.
And we're all privileged in some ways and we're all underprivileged in some ways, depending on which dimension you look at. But there is a spectrum along multiple dimensions of privilege, right? And
Right.
so when we decouple the idea of purpose or being on purpose from the external form and expression of it, then actually that democratizes it to be like actually everyone has a purpose. Like
Right.
everyone who exists is purpose, right?
Mhm.
They are purpose because there's a reason for humans being here right now, right? Regardless
Mhm.
of what the expression of that purpose looks like. And we have an old school idea of what purpose looks like, which is looks a lot like accomplishment, looks like a
Mhm.
lot of
Mhm.
achievement, right?
Right.
And it's not necessarily that, right? Purpose can be fulfilled in um, being there for someone who's having a hard day, and like
Mhm.
being and holding space for that difficult conversation, or smiling at the checkout person in the grocery store, right? Like that
Mhm.
can be part of your purpose.
Yeah, I love that, and oh man, there's so much that I just loved that you just shared right there. Um, you talk about the cyclical nature of purpose, and I feel that that's what the regenerative quality is. Living in that moment and having that feedback, and you talk about it being a relational experience, and I love that so much. Could you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, this is why I think this is so needed right now, because I feel like we need to understand our relationship to purpose differently if we're not going to keep damaging the planet and damaging humanity. Because when we approach it as this like goal oriented linear thing of like this external thing that I need to figure out and achieve, and that it's my purpose, that's very egoic, right? It's very sort of empire, what I call empire building versus wave making, right? So it's like
Right.
maybe your purpose is to like build a yoga school, but if your approach to it is very much this like me and mine, and
Mhm.
I'm building my legacy and whatever, it's like, okay, you can be building a yoga school, which is a beautiful thing to do, but if you're doing it with this old mentality of like building an empire for yourself for the sake of your ego, you're kind of missing it, in my
Mhm.
opinion. So I think that the regenerative nature really has to do with bringing into balance the death part, right? We
Mhm.
mentioned about death before. Like I would say our society is very oriented towards growth, right? The way that we talk about business is like scale or die, go big or go home. It's all
Right.
about this like be big, grow fast, this kind of
Mhm.
like achievement thing. And that's ultimately toxic. It's toxic for us
Mhm.
as beings, and it's toxic for the planet. This like always building, always growing. Well, the other cycle that we've missed, like we've kind of lost connection with, it's part of nature, is dying, is
Mhm.
decaying,
Right.
right? And like the dying and decaying and even destruction of forms has to come into balance with the growth and the building of forms in order for us to like have a healthy relationship with resource and healthy relationship with nature and healthy relationship with other humans. It's like we need to not only accept but actually embrace the death of the forms that we create. As much as we put our love and our intention and energy into building forms, this is part of the listening, right? And the example that's really present for me right now is this online business, this glitter, biodegradable glitter store that I just took offline.
Mhm.
Like if I wasn't listening, I would be like, no, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to push through, like, even though like our sales have gone to zero since COVID started, I'm going to just like cling to this forum that
Mhm.
I made because I'm attached to it, because I don't know what else to do,
Right.
but there's an active in like I actively decided to take down the business, and I'm now in this void space of like I don't know what I'm going to do next for income.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that void space is super, super scary, but it's also really potent. It's really rich
Mhm.
to not know, right? Because when you don't know, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And this process of embracing the death of the forms that we create is what I call regenerative purpose, right? It's like we kind of have to take the things that we create and be able to put them in the compost bin to create fertilizer for the next creation, right? And it's a
Right.
never ending cycle. This is the thing about when we objectify purpose, it makes it like a linear thing. Like
Mhm.
purpose is out there somewhere and we need to get there.
Right.
And it's an illusion, right? Because you don't ever get there. And if you look at it as a regenerative cycle in
Mhm.
nature, it's like
Mhm.
things die, things grow, they're reborn, they're reshaped, they transition.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's the
Yeah.
regenerative part.
I'm seeing so many images of just like compost, and like how many times do we get to like, be reborn in this life where, we really like each moment or each experience just kind of is like the fodder, like the fuel that builds the next iteration of what it is that we're meant to be. And it's this continual process that I love that you describe it as a cyclical process and introduce this or reintroduce this idea of really just honoring the death and the void as a part of that process. Um, and, getting to hear a little bit about all of this has been wonderful. I'm gonna take a question maybe here from the audience from the chat box. P asks, she's curious if purpose is always informed by wounds.
Mm. Yeah. So what I call this, like, I don't know, I wouldn't use that word for it, but I would say that my general inclination is to say yes to that. But what I call it in the regenerative purpose book is personally activating information.
Uh,
So, and I love acronyms, so I made this acronym. PAIN is
Pain.
personally activating information, right? So it's this idea that when you think about physical pain, right,
Mhm.
it's basically your body's way of saying you need to pay attention and you need to send energy there,
Mhm.
right? Like you have a wound, right? Like you injure yourself, like you burn your hand or you break your ankle or whatever, and there's pain. On a body cellular level, it's life's way of saying put energy there, put focus there. Um, so in that sense, yeah, I think it's absolutely related
Mhm.
because we're all uniquely sensitive to things that are happening in the world, and there's a lot of shit happening in the world, but
A
it's
lot.
like, in a way, we need to, and I talk about this as one of the 4 core purpose qualities. We need to attune to where our place is to serve, like, which we can't take all of it in and we can't carry all of these burdens. We would be completely overwhelmed and exhausted, right? So
Right.
we all have a specific place and a particular role in this whole movement that's happening now. And pain is like a road sign, right? To me, it's a direction of like, hey, look here. So I would say it's not necessarily prescriptive in the sense that, like, okay, like if you have a wound, then being a healer of that wound is necessarily your purpose.
Mm.
But I would say that, like, where you feel pain, or rather where you feel sensitivity to the trauma of the world, of the human experience, is a good place to pay attention to start with, right? And when you pay attention to there, then you'll get guidance, right?
Right, right. I love that. I love that so much. Nina asked, on the aspect of death and dying, do you believe that some of the current systems, the patriarchal or toxic capitalism, are ready to die, or do they stand to be transformed? I wonder about this distinction between shifting the old or just building the new.
Yeah. I mean, to me, there are a lot of things dying right now, and
Mhm.
it's a little bit limiting in the sense that, like, I would need to know more about what do you mean by patriarchy and what do you mean by capitalism, right? So, like, I think
Mm,
that there are things that we would typically associate with those words that I think are
mhm,
dying. And it's
mhm,
not even that, like, I personally think they need to die and actually they don't care what I think, right? They're dying. Like, this is just what's happening in life.
mhm.
And we can see that, like, on a massive scale, that these things, no matter how many people might be attached to them, they're being ripped out, right? Like, whether we're ready or not, they're being ripped out. So I can only just observe that, yeah, there are a lot of those things that are dying, and it's making space for something new, which I think we don't really quite know what the new thing is yet. And it's scary because we don't know what the new thing is yet. And I
Mhm,
think all of us who are here right now have a role to play in that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here now, right? The whole,
mhm,
like, our purpose is because we exist,
mhm.
So it's, yeah, to me, it's not an either or. The two things go together, right? If these things weren't dying, there wouldn't be space for new things to be born. And it's like the dying process right now that we're in feels super
Right,
painful.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I love the analogy also always of like a butterfly, right? With the when the it's going through the goop phase and it's becoming something new while also dying at the same
yeah,
time. And it's like kind of this paradox that they both exist at the same time. And
yeah,
it's really wonderful if you think about it that way because there's like, it's a yes and kind of universe where it's like,
yeah,
yes, all of this is, passing away, but also everything is being reborn at the same time. And
Yeah,
It's
it's that potent soup. It's embracing the mush stage.
right.
We're all imaginal cells right now, right? Like those, like the
Mhm.
cocoon, it's not a butterfly, it's not a caterpillar, it's like imaginal cells, right? I love that word too, this imaginal cell,
Mhm.
embracing the mush. And I was thinking that when you were reading my bio, I was like, I feel like a more accurate bio description of me right now would just be like composting, dot, dot, dot. Kind of like when you access a web page and it's like loading, like.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like so many of us are doing, I've definitely had to go through that process in order to, bring this conversation to life as well. So, there's so much, a lot, I think, a lot of contemplation around this death and rebirth happening for a lot of people, whether they're conscious of it or not. A lot of people are grieving right now. Um, and let's see, I'm curious a little bit about how, if how is it that could somebody know when they're living their purpose? What are some telltale signs, when that is all in alignment?
Yeah. So I interviewed a bunch of people about this for the book. Like I went and asked that question to like dozens and dozens of people when I was doing research for the book.
Hmm.
And it was really striking to me how much consistency there was in the answer to that question, right? That there were um, basically four different varieties or flavors of things. And actually, it's interesting because those four things actually aligned to the four purpose qualities that I
Right.
talk about. So the feeling, so when people describe to me in the interviews that I did, what does it feel like when you're experiencing being on purpose or when you experience being aligned with your
Hmm.
purpose? And
Hmm.
one of the things is I feel like myself. I feel, you could say, I feel authentic, I feel expressed, I feel free, but it's some flavor of, I feel like I'm real. I feel like I'm really myself. Like I can be true, I can be authentic, right?
Hmm.
Um, Another aspect of it is this feeling of service or this feeling of connectedness. There's this aspect of when people feel they're connected with purpose, there's this, um, like I feel right now, actually, that like I'm giving into something that is receiving me, right? There's this
Hmm.
idea that like what I'm putting out is being picked up, right? What I
Hmm.
am offering is being received. This feeling of um, helping others and being connected to the web of life and being connected to humanity and being in service is another dimension of it. Um, Another one is this idea of the flow state, right? So people talk about like when you lose sense of time or whatever, when you're tracking, right?
Right.
You're not working in a very mechanical, task driven way. Like whatever it is you're doing, I mean, you could be doing brain surgery or you could be, riding your bicycle or whatever. You can still experience this like such a deep state of presence that time disappears, right? So people
Hmm.
often describe to me like, and some people would call that flow state, some people would call that deep presence, but there's this sense of you're out of linear time almost, right? When
Hmm.
you're really in this flow. And the fourth one has to do with what I would call magic. It's experiencing synchronicities. It's experiencing so-called coincidences of how you're supported by life, whether that's
Hmm.
financially or through random, like me connecting with you, for example.
Yeah.
It's like the somewhat random but not random things that happen, and feeling this like omnipresent sense of support and being held in the web of life that's like benevolent, right? That life is actually supporting you and helping you along the way. So those are some of the qualities that came up. People use different words for these things, but what I looked at when I was doing these interviews was like, what can I distill this down to?
Right.
That's common, and these four things were basically common to everyone's responses of how they described I feel on purpose.
Hmm. I love that. Yeah, there's so much that I really saw myself in. I mean, exactly, even having you on here was a complete synchronicity in that just it so happened to align, and I feel like all these examples I'm touching on inside of my mind really help me to get a grasp for how to feel for it. And I think that's really important, moving forward like with people coming out from shelter in place and really looking to their lives for that feedback, like, do I feel ease in my body when this is happening, and it feels like something that people can take like momentary choices on
Yeah,
to affect the feedback loop, right, that they're experiencing.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
uh, I love that. And so I'm curious a little bit also about, I'm sure there, and I know that in your book you talk a lot about some of these practices. Um, but what's been one practice that has been really helpful to you, and also one practice that maybe can help some of the women here
Mm,
to help us cultivate a sense of purpose through this uncertain time?
yeah, this is one of those things where I feel like there's 31 different flavors for everything. It's like, I do talk about some practices in the book around how you can cultivate some of these purpose qualities. But I would say it's not one size fits all. And on some level, you just need to figure out what works for you, like try a lot of different things. But to answer the question about like what is an important practice for me, I mean, one is sitting meditation, like super basic, just sitting. And today I didn't do it yet because we had sort of it's an early call for me because it's
Right.
still morning here. But normally this is what I would do first thing in the morning is I would sit for meditation. I just light one stick of incense and I sit
Hmm.
before I check email, before I get on social media, right? All of that thing. So, and I'm not perfect at it. I don't do it every day. Sometimes I don't do it for many days in a row. But I would say this is a pretty consistent practice of mine. Is just sitting meditation, nothing
Hmm.
fancy, just
Hmm.
sitting and breathing. The other thing that I do a lot is actually maybe I can even show you because I have my notebook here. Is I do this drawing meditation. So sometimes, like if I don't want to sit still, but I want to clear my mind and just like come to like a balanced state of mind, what I do is
Hmm.
I draw mandalas freehand. So
Wow.
I basically, and this has been a practice I've done for years. So these are some of the things um,
Wow.
that I
That's
draw.
incredible.
Yeah.
And
So
that's
I
freehand? Could you
that's
hold it up a
freehand.
little bit longer?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many of these. I have like books and books full of
That is
these.
incredible.
Yeah, so like
Wow.
basically, it looks pretty, but it's only
Mhm,
because I've been doing this almost every day for 4 years. You should see some of the ones that I did like 4 years ago when I
mhm,
started. They were not that pretty, but the practice of it is basically it relaxes your mind, right? So
mhm,
like the flow state that I was talking about, it sort of induces that for me. It forces me into a flow state because when I'm doing this, I can't be thinking about anything else. I can't be worrying about money or planning my next retreat or thinking about the conversation I need to have. It's a difficult
mhm.
conversation, like literally my mind has to empty in order for me to produce this.
Right.
And so what happens is that literally as soon as I put my pen to the paper, my whole system relaxes. And the practice is basically a practice of being in flow, like of being in acceptance. And if I were to describe like how to do it, I would say like you get a blank piece of paper and a black pen. You make a shape.
Mhm,
You rotate the paper slightly. You make the same shape. You rotate the paper slightly. You make the same shape. You
mhm.
continue that until you get back to where you started from and you get to a full circle, and then you do it again. Right? That's
Wow.
about as simple as it gets. And the trick of it is to be able to do it, you have to not judge the imperfection of it. Right? So
Mm,
the freehand thing is actually training your mind to be like, it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical. These things are not perfectly symmetrical. If you put a mirror down
yeah.
the middle of this, it looks symmetrical, but if you put a mirror down the middle of this, it's not
Mm,
symmetrical because it's
right,
free.
right.
But
Mhm.
there's something that happens with the eye of like when there's this kind of pattern, it makes it look beautiful, right? So there's so many lessons in this for me. It's like the acceptance of the imperfections, the not planning anything, and like if you feel like you made a mistake, that you sort of just integrate it into the pattern. It's like being like, oh, that happened. I didn't mean to make that mark, but let me integrate that into another shape and just fold it into the design.
Mhm.
So it's a beautiful
Beautiful.
metaphor for life.
I love that so much. It really feels also like a practice to kind of quiet the inner critic and just let something, just let yourself empty so that something more can kind of come through. Because
Exactly.
that's the element that I feel that really is kind of fuels that sense of purpose, right? That where there's like an emptiness, you
For
know,
sure.
a process of emptying so that something more can come through. I love that so much.
Exactly. I mean, we block the flow state all the time by the inner critic, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, like I didn't want to do that, or I was actually hoping for something better or different. And then it's like, actually, the second we have that thought, we're not in the flow anymore.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that so much. It's true, and we do it all the time.
all the
And
time.
yeah, so any practices to kind of help quiet the inner critic. I love that a lot. And um, I'm curious if there's any other questions here from the live stream. I'm going to go ahead and take a look. Take a look. Um, if you have any questions for Wendy still regarding any, any things, any one of the things that we talked on today. Let's see here. I don't know if this was a question. Connection and importance of grief and work and purpose. Um, I don't know if that was a question, P. Maybe you could clarify. Um, but if not, I'm going to just go ahead and say that yeah, I think maybe this could close it if there's no any other questions. I love that this interview was like I feel like was so electric and it was really I really lost myself in the flow of just listening and tuning in here.
I'm
Let's
happy
see
to
here.
hear that because my inner critic was just very active because I was thinking like, did I talk too long about the mandala thing?
Oh, I love
Like,
I love that. I actually really want to try it. So thanks for
yeah,
the detail on it.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's also
uh,
in my book actually. In the if you go in the you have the book, right? So if you go in
uh-huh.
the appendix, it's one of the practices that I list for that, the
Mhm.
creative flow one.
Awesome. Well, yeah, if you would love to learn more about Wendy's book, Regenerative Purpose, it's available for purchase for $9 if you'd like to invest in supporting her work in the world. And we also have a discount code available for those in financial constraints. Uh, the code would grant you the entire book in exchange for your email, and you could email me to request this code, and I'll gladly send it over to you. I'm going to go ahead and post the link here so that you could find out more about uh, Wendy's book. Here, I'm going to go ahead and post it here.
Yeah, and it's not on Amazon. It's only on my website.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I love that. All right, we're going to post it here. All right, 1 second. All right. We're going to go ahead. You could go ahead and click on the bottom link here. It says click here to learn more. Um,
Oh, that's so
and
cool.
yeah, and you could click on that and it'll take you to Wendy's awesome website where you could learn more about her book, Regenerative Purpose. Um, so I'm going to go ahead, with Wendy, I'm going to go ahead and bid Wendy a beautiful day here. Thank you so much for lending your wisdom and just sharing your knowledge and your, what I call living wisdom. It feels like it's a living wisdom. You've definitely embodied it, and have lived it and are living it and are in the process of it. So thank you so much for lending your voice to Illuminated Women. And we're going to go ahead and say goodbye, Wendy. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much for
Oh, sorry, Wendy, I cut you off a little bit early. Thank you so much again, Wendy, for being here. And thank you so much, beautiful women, for tuning in to Illuminated Women. My hope is that this conversation has served your highest evolution, and I invite you to connect and converse about this conversation with each other on our Facebook group, Illuminated Women, which I'm going to go ahead and post here uh, on the chat box. Here, you can go ahead and click on that, and it'll take you to the Facebook group. Alternatively, you could just, write any comments or things that you've taken away from this time here together on the chat box to the right. And I'm sending you so many blessings on your evening. I would love for you to join me next week for Nimisha Gandhi's talk, Releasing Period Shame and Re Entering the World. And that talk is going to be all about some of the hormonal changes that a lot of women have been going through. I know that there's been people missing their periods and or changes in hormones. So if you want to learn more about how to get your hormones in line and aligned for this next phase, you could go ahead and join us. And I'm so happy that you took the time to be here and ask your questions and show up with your full hearts. I'm sending you so much love and so many blessings. Goodbye.